Today, I'm going to share the best and the worst things about external camera monitors as a YouTuber. I've been using external monitors in a range of different filming scenarios over the past 4 years, not only as a YouTuber, but also as a videographer, and I've reached some conclusions about what makes these great and what makes them really frustrating sometimes. Hopefully this video will help you decide whether or not they suit your workflow as a creator and whether or not you should pick one up yourself. I'll start out by talking about the things that I really like about external monitors, and then I'll share some of the things that I find really frustrating about these things. And a big thanks to OBSBot for sponsoring this video. Alright, so the first best thing about external monitors I actually already mentioned in the intro, and that is just the fact that it's a bigger screen. And I know that sounds kind of basic, but having a bigger screen actually does really make a big difference. I find it particularly useful when I'm sitting down shooting A-roll like this. If I've got my external monitor placed on top of my camera, it's just really handy when I'm sitting back from my camera to be able to see myself a lot more clearly than just using the small little flip out camera monitor. And this just really helps me to make sure that I've got everything right. Like my framing helps me see if I'm centered or not, helps me see if I've got enough headroom, and it's also great for helping me see if I'm exposed correctly and if I'm in focus. I also find it really handy when I'm shooting B-roll because I find just little things in the background that maybe I wouldn't normally notice because of a small screen. I pick up on the bigger monitor and I'm able to adjust, make changes, and just overall frame my image better. Plus, with a lot of external monitors, you can load your own custom LUTs onto the monitors so you can get a better sense of what the final image is going to look like. Now, the second big thing that I really like about external monitors that I find super useful is the monitoring controls. And that's basically the main reason why you would probably want to buy an external monitor. And for me, there's kind of three main ones that I use most regularly, and then one extra one that I want to talk about separately. But the three first monitoring tools that I use is overlays. And this is basically just adding like guides and frames onto your display. And this can help you just make sure you've got your framing right. So the most common one I use is the rule of thirds. This just really helps me to line up my shots, make sure things are centered. Combining the rule of thirds with a bigger monitor just really helps you nail that composure. The next monitoring tool that I really like is focus peaking. And if you're not sure what this is, basically it's when the display shows the parts of the image that are in focus in color. But this is super handy if you're trying to make sure you're in focus yourself, or if you're trying to film a product, for example, you want to make sure the right sections of the product are in focus. Focus peaking is invaluable for that type of thing, especially if you're using manual focus. But even if you're using autofocus, focus peaking has definitely saved me countless times. And again, combining it with a big screen means you get much more consistent focus throughout your clips. And finally, from time to time, I do use the zebras as well. And zebras is basically a way of helping you to make sure your exposure is correct. And on a lot of external displays, you can select a certain brightness level where they'll show up, and this helps you know if this part of the image has zebras on it, it's overexposed, I might need to bring down my overall exposure to compensate. All right, so kind of separate to those monitoring tools is my personal favorite monitoring tool, and this is pretty much the biggest reason why I use an external monitor, and that is false color. Now, if you've seen some of my other videos on videography, you'll know that I'm a big fan of false color, but basically the way it works is it converts your image into a standardized color range, and this color range correlates to exposure levels in your image. And the one that I always go back to is kind of like the pink, gray, green area in the center of the chart. This is where you want your skin tones to be. So I always will check on my false color monitor, just make sure my skin tones are in that range on my image. And if they are, I know for sure based on a standardized chart that my exposure is correct for my skin tone. Before I use false color, I would always just end up guessing my exposure, just using my eyes on my little monitor, or I would use the Sony light meter, which is good, but it only gives you a general range across your whole image, and it's nowhere near as specific as using false color. So all of those monitoring tools really just help you to get super consistent results from your footage, which is really valuable to me as a YouTuber who regularly uploads content. All right, so the last best thing about external monitors is a little bit out of the ordinary, and basically it helps to stabilize your footage. And the reason I can say that is because basically you're adding extra weight to your camera when you add on an external monitor. And if, like me, you have a really light mirrorless camera, if you're trying to shoot anything handheld, you can get a lot of like little micro jitters just from moving about and the way your body moves. And this can result in seeing those little jitters in your footage, which just makes it a little bit more amateur. You never want shaky footage unless it's intentional, of course. And so having that extra weight on your overall rig just helps to stabilize the footage because your camera is a lot more steady in your hands. All right, now let's talk about some of the worst things in my experience when it comes to external monitors. And if they put you off buying a full-size mirrorless camera and an external monitor, then today's sponsor OBSBot might have the solution for you. Now, I've used probably 4 or 5 different webcams over the past year and a half. Honestly, even if they weren't sponsoring this video, this is probably the the best one I've used in terms of image quality and features. It's got an ultra large 1 by 1.5 inch CMOS sensor, which means you get incredible image quality. Like honestly, you could use this as a main YouTube camera because the image quality is honestly that good. And it's got a dual native ISO, so you can use it in bright conditions as well as in dimly lit conditions. It's also got auto tracking with auto zoom, so if you're doing presentations or making videos, it will just automatically track you, which is perfect for solo content creators like myself. And it's also got voice control, which is actually pretty crazy. You can ask it to start and stop tracking, zoom in and out, go to different preset positions. Position 1. And you can even tell it to go to sleep when you're done recording. Sleep, Tony. And if you don't just want to use your voice, you can use gesture control as well, which lets you use gestures to do a lot of the same things that you can do with your voice. And last but not least, the autofocus on this webcam is like 4 times faster than traditional webcams. And trust me, if you're filming YouTube videos, an out of focus video after you've recorded it all is so frustrating. So having super accurate and responsive autofocus is amazing. Make sure you check it out using the link in the description. And thanks again to OBSBot for sponsoring today's video. All right, so let's talk about the worst things when it comes to these monitors. And the first thing is the fact that they add extra weight. And I know I just said that that's a benefit, but it also does have a dark side, which is obviously the fact that because it's heavier means it's going to make your arms sore, especially if you're shooting a lot of handheld for an extended period. The extra weight on your rig is definitely going to weigh you down. You will feel it. So that is one obvious downside. Now, if you are going to be using it on top of your camera for A-roll shoots, for example, and you have it on a tripod, then this problem isn't an issue at all because you're not carrying the camera. It may also limit the types of gimbals that you can put your camera on if you're wanting to use the gimbal with the monitor. So that's definitely one downside when it comes to these monitors. And of course, some are heavier than others. Generally, the more expensive ones are actually lighter, but that's just something to keep in mind. All right, the second most frustrating thing about these monitors is external batteries. And the reason they're frustrating is just because you have to charge them. Now the actual battery life actually isn't too bad. Like this Viltrox battery will last about 2 hours, but once it goes flat, you have to take it off the monitor, plug it into charge, wait for it to charge, re-plug it in, blah, 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 blah. It's just frustrating. Now again, with a lot of these external displays, they do have external power in, but that can also be a bit frustrating because it's just one extra thing you have to set up. And if you're like me, I tend to move my camera about quite a lot. And so having to unplug and reset up everything every single time I shoot is just frustrating. The simpler it is, the better it is in my opinion. And external monitors will definitely complicate things to some degree, which leads me to the third annoying thing about external monitors, and that is having to mount them. And that seems kind of obvious, but just having to put them on and off using like an external cold shoe mount, something like this, it's relatively quick and easy. But again, because I use my camera in all sorts of different scenarios, sometimes I like to use the external monitor, sometimes I don't have it permanently attached to my camera, and therefore I have to take it on and off. And once you include having to find your HDMI cable, plug it into the display, plug it into the camera, attach it to the cold shoe, all that kind of stuff, it can become time consuming and just kind of annoying to do. Plus the HDMI cable, once it's plugged into my ZV-E1, can block my little camera display where I like to be able to reference the settings my camera is currently on. So that can be kind of annoying. So that's also worth keeping in mind. All right, so in conclusion, are they worth picking up if you're a YouTuber, if you're a content creator like myself? Well, personally, I find that it's actually worth the hassle in order to get the benefits of the monitoring displays. Because for me, it just really helps me to be more consistent with the quality of my footage. That means I spend less time correcting in post, things like exposure or having to re-record because something was out of focus. And the extra screen size really does help me to frame things better and just make sure everything is looking good. Now, are they essential YouTuber equipment? I would say definitely not. It's kind of more of a nice to have than a need to have, but it will help you get a few extra percentage points in terms of quality, which can help maximize the production quality of your content. So I'd say if you're just getting started in content creation, then you definitely don't need to pick one up. There's definitely other things that are higher priority that are worth upgrading first. But if you've already been creating content for a while and you're wanting to take your content just to that next step and you're okay with the trade-offs, then they definitely are useful tools to have in your kit. But obviously there's no point getting an external monitor for something like false color if you don't really know how false color works, which is why I've made a tutorial here which you can watch to help you understand how to use false color to nail your exposure every single time.